moderate the panel and ask these three individuals to kind of first reflect on their own experiences with Black Lives Matter and kind of intersecting identities. So what you may not be aware of is that all these three, Qasim, MuslimARC, and Donna, are African American. And some of our presentations have touched on, the intersection of race, religion, and gender. So understanding multiple identities and how they influences a person's kind of thoughts and passions and behaviors. So when it comes to, is everyone familiar with Black Lives Matter in some form? No. Okay. So that'll be the first question. Maybe each of you or explain in your mind, like, what is the movement around Black Lives Matter? Some people just think it's sort of a Twitter hashtag, but there's kind of been an emergence of many conversations following Eric Garner's death and Michael Brown in Ferguson. So if each of you could kind of, from your perspective, talk about the meaning of Black Lives Matter for you. Martha,
let the doctor go. There's a doctor in the house. So let the doctor go.
I'm getting there. It's actually fairly easy to kind of trace chronologically, right, and pinpoint the Black Lives Matter movement, right, as such, right, which, if you're not familiar with it, right, has been kind of a rallying cry around this issue of police killings of Black citizens, right? Black men, Black women, Black children, right? And this has kind of emerged, right? It has a life as a hashtag, right, on Twitter, but it also defines like an organization, right, and a slogan, right? So it's a lot of different things at once, and it's actually like, reasonably fair to kind of pinpoint it as an organization and an organizational strategy that kind of emerged in the aftermath of the George Zimmerman verdict. So it actually goes back a little bit further and most commonly is credited, the founding of Black Lives Matter as kind of a thing, right, is most commonly credited to three women. One from the Bay Area and the other two, I can't remember exactly where they're from right now, right? And so the hashtag emerges out of this as kind of a way to organize activities and brand the activities of the organization and the conversations and the things that were kind of erupting around the killing of Trayvon Martin, right? And so, it's picked up steam, right, in the aftermath of Ferguson, and then the chain reaction of protests that have kind of erupted from that since the summertime. So Mike Brown is killed in Ferguson on August 9th, and then peaceful protesters are met shortly thereafter with tanks and tear gas and all of the things that you may or may not be familiar with that just kind of happened in the aftermath of that particular incident, and then this kind of sparks protests across the country, right? That's kind of the abbreviated version. I mean, I think it's certainly possible to think about Black Lives Matter as a concept as going back way further than that, right? Because this notion of racial profiling of Black and Latino folks, Black and brown folks in the U.S. has a long history. It starts way before August 9th of 2014. And I think, if for people who come from those communities, I mean, we kind of know that this is just the drill. This is just kind of how it is, and it's been that way for a long time. So Black Lives Matter kind of emerges out of this. It becomes kind of amplified in this moment, after like post Ferguson, but it actually goes back a little bit further than that.
I guess for me, I mean, there's really not much more to add to it, particularly historically. I see the campaign of Black Lives Matter as kind of, in some ways, a revolt against post-raciality in America. I think the Black community increasingly, especially for those that either choose to or have no choice but to remain identified as Black, have been under increasing pressure to have empathy from the broader society for injustices that they suffer from. So in some ways I see it as kind of like a backlash against the tendency of post-modernity to be post-racial. So that's for myself, that's how I see it.
Could I just ask you to define, if you could concisely, what you mean by post-raciality?
So there's, I mean, just like, so for somebody like myself, right, which tends to cause a lot of confusion to people when I identify as black, they're kind of like, they don't get it. And I think when I was a kid growing up in the 70s, even if you were as fair-skinned as Qasim and I, it was just kind of like, okay, they're just fair-skinned black people. Now in 2015, there is a push, even from those people coming out of traditional, I guess you could say, trajectories of blackness, where they no longer wish to ascribe exclusively to that one category. And therefore there is a big push, I feel, in the last maybe 15, 20 years, both within the black community, from those trying to get out, and then those outside of the black community that have pushed against this sort of broad labeling. And therefore, I mean, Obama himself is somebody that's been linked with the term post-racial America, not just in terms of his own ethnicity, in terms of having a white parent and a non-white parent, but also in terms of, because he's now the president of the United States, that essentially there are no more social barriers or infrastructure that are inhibiting black people. So now we can just move beyond talking about race whatsoever.
Okay, so you guys aren't laughing because my Samsung is not a Mac. That was the way. I'm probably the senior. I am the senior panel member here. I grew up in the 60s as a child. I was in the first grade, I believe, when Martin Luther King was assassinated. And I remember it vividly. They had the PA announcement, how Martin Luther King had just been assassinated. He was dead. And the little kids in the class, everybody crying and really not registering who Martin Luther King was, because we were only in the first grade. But I also remember, you know, the revolution was televised at that time. I remember the Vietnam War being played out on television. I remember traveling down south. My mother was from Louisiana. So we would go every summer to Shreveport, Louisiana, and when we hit the Mason-Dixon line, we would literally have to get off the train and go to the rear carriage. Those kind of things. I remember seeing whites only water fountains and things like that. Even though we can give white people blood transfusions, we couldn't share water fountains. So all of that came to fore when we see this hashtag Black Lives Matter, when we see Eric Garner choked out on national TV in a viral video, when we see Michael Brown laying in the street for 4 hours, you know, those resurrected and brought back all of those issues and conflicts of the 60s. And I think now we recognize that because we have the first POTUS, who is happened to be African American, that it has not liberated us. We are still in the 60s, except for now it's just a little more subtle, and you'll see it in this concept that the sociologists, the anthropologists will refer to as intersectionality. How you take on, I was talking with Mark, you know, we're both African American men, and we're both Muslims, so we took on another subgroup or subculture that weighed discrimination upon us. You know? And so these young men and these men who have been murdered in viral videos, you will see how, as Latinos, as Asians, as Muslims, these intersections are causing a problem that many in white America can't deal with.
So I have a follow-up question to that, because I wanted to ask each of you to kind of also talk about, if you're participating in Black Lives Matter, how do you bring all of your identities to that movement and to that protest? So it's not just, you know, as black men, this is something that we're concerned about, but we're also Muslim, okay? And so oftentimes the conversation is framed in terms of either thinking as the black community as Christian and the Muslim community as Arab, right? So now that you bring these identities, how do you participate in a movement that may also not know what to do with all of the identities you bring?
That's an excellent question. I think myself and Donna and you, we know. We formed a group called Muslims Make It Plain, because we didn't see a Muslim or an Islamic reaction to the Black Lives Matter issue. We were participating in Black Lives Matter, marches and rallies, but we didn't see coming out of the mosque or the masjid. And sometimes, Muslims may have a tendency to feel removed from those types of situations. But because we're African Americans, we plugged right in, and we saw it. But we got some negative feedback or commentary from within our own subgroup. You're Muslims, why are you out there marching for this? You have Muslim women, you should be protecting them, and so on and so forth. They just didn't get it. And a lot of folks just didn't get it. And so we overcame that because we knew that in our faith, we're told to stand out for what is right and forbid what is wrong. And there was an upsurge from our clergy, from our local imams, who said, you shouldn't be doing this.
Although, to be fair, that's a Philly thing. Let's make it plain that it's a Philly issue. So I myself, actually, I'm the imam, I'm the leader of a religious community in Southern California. And I find in some ways, because my congregation is almost 100% non-African American. So I'm a non-phenotypically black imam of an immigrant Muslim community. So in some ways I found it very challenging, and still find it challenging, to go before the community, and sometimes I really feel like I'm pushing a car uphill. If I want to talk about something that's taking place in Palestine, I'll get, tremendous empathetic reaction. If I talk about something that's dealing with, something in America, one, there tends to be this kind of like, all right, how does this really relate to us? And then even more particularly, if I want to start talking about some black